Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football.
Hey, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football and training camp. We're 2 practices into training camp, so we've got a bit to talk about as far as what we've seen on the field as well as reports coming out of camp. We'll talk about all that stuff. But first, we actually get to break a little bit of news here on the show, at least for us, recording-wise. About a half hour ago, it was reported that Devin Witherspoon finally signed his contract and is under team control now and will be attending his first practice, presumably, today, Friday, out at the VMAC. Welcome in, Keith.
Yeah, it's interesting that it took this long. I mean, usually these things get done like months ago, and it's not like it used to be. Like they're back in the day where these holdouts could last forever because player could get an extra $10 million. Now everything is set as far as those financials. You cannot get more by holding out. It's part of the collective bargaining agreement, exactly where your slot is based on your draft position and field position. So it's a little bit surprising that it got here, but there are a couple things that they can still negotiate. Right. The first one is offsets. So if a player gets cut and then signs with another team, do they, as far as like the guarantees, does the Seahawks have to keep paying? And that's what the offsets is. So if, let's say, a player gets cut and signs with another team for the league minimum. Okay, well, that means the Seahawks are off the hook for $700,000 a year for that player that's on the new deal. The rest of it, they're still guaranteed, but they don't have to pay that part. That's what an offset is. And this was, the first couple of years of the new, this new rookie structure. That was kind of the big bargaining point that some teams kind of leaned into and players did, and it became kind of annoying. But that seems to have worked itself out just because of precedent. And now we're into the other side of it, which is when do they get their bonus money? Because that's it's in the contract. So that, it's in the collective bargaining agreement. They can't change it, but the team wants to spread the money out over a couple of years, and the player wants it all up front. My guess is that that's something which is going to show up in the next collective bargaining agreement, so that we don't have these kind of holdouts.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's what it came down to. He was owed a $20.2 million signing bonus. That is already pre-negotiated in the CBA, as you indicated, and they finally came to an agreement on how that was paid out. Details are pending on that. We do know it's a $31.86 million fully guaranteed deal with that bonus, and they came to that agreement this morning. He's going to be on the field. I think that's the big takeaway. I don't think that there was any angst. I don't understand, quite frankly, the I'll say slight overreaction about this deal, him not being in. He's making a bad name for himself, blah, 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 blah. We've seen this over and over again for years, and it never really puts a ding in a guy's character to work these things out. It's fairly common. It sometimes doesn't last into training camp. As you said, most of these things are fully negotiated prior to camp. Once in a while, these things happen. Nobody's going to hold it against this guy, and everyone's going to forget about this blip in a couple of weeks. It's not that big of a deal, really, and missing 2 practices overall gives a chance, quite frankly, for a couple other guys to get some reps in practice. Now he'll be part of that. So welcome in Witherspoon. Now we've got a full roster, and it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
So okay.
He missed a couple of practices. One of which is mostly like, stretching and cardio and that kind of stuff. And then he missed 1 day of actual practice. And so come on, let's not overreact to any of this.
Yeah. So good news all around. There are a couple other contract deals that got finalized this week. One of them was Uchenna Nwasu. Age 26, signed a 3-year, $59 million extension through 2026. It brought his 2023 cap number down $3 million this season, which benefits the team a little bit. He told reporters, I want to be here. I don't want to have the possibility of having to go somewhere else. The culture here, the young team here, Pete Carroll, the connections of people I see all the time. It feels like a home here. It's not too far from LA. It's 2.5-hour flight. It's on the West Coast. The weather's nice. I just want to be here. It just makes sense for me to be here. So why do I want to take a chance going somewhere else when I'm right at home being here? So he's locked in now. He's paid like a top 10 pass rusher, Keith. Had 9.5 sacks last year. We brought in some help around him this year. Looks to kind of build on that. And he's excited to be here. A young player. It's a perfect signing last year, I think, where John Schneider really knocked it out of the park, not only with free agency and the draft. And then I thought again this year, if he's not under some sort of executive of the year watch, I just don't understand like how he can't be part of that conversation, because he's just really doing a great job this year as far as getting the players in, getting them signed, working through the process in the draft, acquiring talent, keeping talent that they really want. I just have nothing bad to say at all about any of it.
Yeah, it's been, they walked into this year with, they had cap room, but they had Geno Smith to re-sign. And being able to get him under contract with a team-friendly deal, but it's not like, where they just like completely, stuck it to Geno. They gave him all these incentives, and they actually hope that he goes out and earns them. And so with that, and then that ate all their cap room, so they really didn't have anything to work with. For them to be able to go through and acquire the players that they've acquired, and the way the draft fell, and get the guys that they were able to get, and all the contracts and getting things reworked and that kind of stuff to make this roster where it is. I think he should. I think he really kind of deserved it last year, given the draft that the team had and the massive overachievement compared to expectations. I mean,
and the trade itself.
Yeah. The Wilson trade, and then the team doing well, despite, everyone, they were picked to be in the top 3 of the draft. And instead they made the playoffs. And that had a lot to do with the talent that he put in this roster and around Geno Smith. He should have been at least considered last year for sure. And right now, he's having just as good of a year so far this year, it appears.
Both of us espoused for a long time that this was a move that made sense for the team. They knew they wanted Uchenna Nwasu for the long term, to have him go out there and have another great year, possibly surpassing his stats from this last season. Only makes him more expensive as time goes on. Now they get him on not only his terms but our terms as well, and lock him up to that extension is just a good signing. It makes sense for the team. It's the kind of player that you want to sign to an extension and build around. So again, great news for the Seahawks here. I will also mention that Quandre Diggs restructured his contract, converting his 2023 base salary into bonus, which also created about $3 million of cap savings. So the Seahawks have about $16.5 million in savings. That was before the Witherspoon signing, but it made room for that, maybe a couple other moves to be able to make during training camp and before the season, or up till the trade deadline if necessary. So all around, good management of that cap. Let's talk about injuries and get those out of the way really quick. Before we recorded last time, we didn't have the list of PUP players right before training camp started. We do now. We know that Jamal Adams is not in camp yet with the torn quad. They're going to bring him along slow. may or may not be available for the first game. We just don't know yet. It sounds optimistic, but again, they're going to slow roll this thing, and we'll see where he's at. Jordan Brooks, again, ACL week 17, started on the PUP list. No surprises there. Pete still seems to indicate some sort of optimism that he's going to be ready for the first game, which would mean he'd need to come in probably about the second week of camp here to start working out and so forth. We'll just kind of have to see where that goes. Noah Fant was a little bit of a surprise on this list. Pete Carroll said that he had a little bit of a knee procedure. The timeline there is unknown, at least to me, but shouldn't be too long. Brian Monet is going to be a longer term thing. I think that he's probably going to end up spending the year on IR. That's the indication for me, but he could come off as soon as week 8. Austin Theolu had knee surgery. His status is unknown at some point in the offseason. And Tariq Woolen, who had a knee cleanup in May, around June 1st, right at the end of May, had a 4 to 6 week recovery time. He's surpassed that by a few weeks, but they're just going to bring him along slow. I don't think that there's necessarily anything long-term there, but that's the list. Just wanted to put that out there.
So, yeah, one thing to throw out there for those of you that have heard the PUP list, it's one of those things where there's two different PUP lists. There's the one now, and then there's the one that is after week 1. The reason why players are put on the PUP list now is because it gives them a roster spot that they can, sign some undrafted rookie or whatever, just another body to have in there, another guy for them to look at type of thing. But it also gives them a flexibility later, and I'll get to that. There's nothing that keeps the guys on this list. As soon as they pass the physical, they're off the list and they're back on the practice field. You could have a guy that starts on the PUP list for 1 day and then gets taken off of it. I've seen in the past them, because they do this the day before the first practice when players report and they do physicals. I've seen players get put on the PUP list and they get taken off in the morning right before practice of the first practice so they can get on the field and practice with everybody. It happens. This is different than the in-season PUP list, which if you land on that one, you have to sit out for at least 6 games. Like if you end up on that one, you have to sit out for 6 weeks. The thing is, if you in order to be on that list, in order to be on the PUP list in the regular season, you have to have started camp on this PUP list. So that's the only relationship between the two of them. If you weren't on it, if the player was on the active roster, not on the PUP list, they got out, they practiced, they got hurt after practice, you can't go on to the physically unable to perform list. You have to go on to injured reserve, which at that point ends their season, ends their year. They can't play anymore. Or the team has to carry them as an injured player on the roster, at least until the 53-man roster is made. And so, yeah, okay, I'm just a little wonkish. I'm getting into the rules and all of that, but just trying to
I don't
give you a little bit.
Is that, you just said that if a player gets hurt today, he has to go on IR.
Yep.
And he can't come off of it.
Yep.
But players get hurt all the time in training camp, get put on some sort of list, and then are available, mid-season or whatever.
No. You can't, if you get hurt during training camp, you have.
What if you have a little quad strain and
the team has to carry you on the roster until the 53-man roster is set on the Tuesday of week 1, right? And then you have to have been on the roster for 24 hours, and then they can move you to IR and open up a spot, which is one of those annoying things that teams have to do now. Is they'll have a guy that they'll be like, okay, we want this guy to be able to come off of IR mid-season. And so they'll cut someone, let so that way someone else can make the roster. 24 hours later, they put that player on injured reserve, and they have to go re-sign the player that they cut. The Seahawks actually did that to Geno Smith like 3 years ago, where at one point Wilson was the only quarterback on the roster because they cut Geno coming out of camp, and then turned around and re-signed him to exactly the same contract he already had. But they did that just because no team can claim him off of waivers because he's a vet. He's been in the league long enough that he doesn't go through the waiver process. And they had an agreement with Smith and his agent that, hey, we need to do this. We can get this guy across. Are you okay with that? And they were like, sure, whatever. But yeah, that's what you end up having to do. It's some of these weird rules. If you guys that get hurt in practice and stuff during training camp puts the team in a weird spot.
Interesting. Okay. So let's get to the cuts and signings. So the big name this week was Alton Robinson. Now, we had both speculated and talked about the idea that Alton Robinson might be not be able to make, not pass physical, and then they'd cut him. And sure enough, that's kind of what happened. Pete Carroll said it just didn't work out. He just wasn't ready to go, which indicates that either they didn't feel like he was working to recover from his injury fast enough, or he was, and he just wasn't ready, and they wanted to take the opportunity to let him go and possibly bring him back at some point. But we'll see how that goes. What do you think about Alton Robinson?
It's disappointing. This is a kid with a lot of talent. Probably a second-round pick talent. Seahawks got in the 5th round because of some off-field stuff and some questions about maturity and that kind of stuff. Showed up as a rookie, really showed up on the field, especially with Darrell Taylor, who was picked before him in the same draft, not playing that year. A lot of expectations. Good player on the field, but there were questions about, how his rehab was going and that kind of stuff to Pete Carroll in the middle of summer. And Pete Carroll's response was, I don't know. He's not here. We haven't talked to him. He hasn't communicated with us. We have no idea where he's at in his rehab. That's not okay. When that's the quote, right?
Yeah.
That's
publicly being called out.
You're being called out. And the Seahawks weren't going to have any of that. So they cut him before training camp started. They needed a roster spot. He was the first one to go, which is telling.
That's really telling. Yeah, no doubt.
That they were basically done with all of that. And the thing is that when they drafted him and all of that, they were really struggling to find guys at his position. Now the team is loaded at his position.
He was unlikely to make the roster unless he had a really standout camp. And if he's just unable to go, that wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a massive change in terms of roster construction over the 3 years. He went from being, the Seahawks desperately needed him or Taylor to step up, and Taylor didn't get to play, to they've got really good, healthy players on this roster that are going to struggle to make this roster because of how many guys there are. I mean, it's now they've got that's one more roster decision decided now, and they've got a roster spot that they can use for someone else. And they just cleared a whole bunch of cap space, which the combination of those two things, an open roster spot and a whole bunch of newly acquired cap space, makes me wonder if something's coming.
Me too. Yeah. It could be a long play. It could be something right around the corner. We'll just have to wait and see. They also cut cornerbacks Isaiah Dunn and James Campbell. Signings-wise, they signed linebacker Ben Burke-Irvin. The interesting thing about Ben is he was on the roster. He was drafted or undrafted rookie free agent, I think, came on from the University of Washington. Mm-hmm. Lost in the 2021 preseason to a knee injury and nerve damage as well. He hasn't played it down since. He was cut this spring, finally, after they held on for a while. They hadn't seen enough improvement on that knee, give him a knee injury designation. And then, but he came back. He signed a contract couple days ago, right before camp. Finally fully recovered, and it's a great testament for him and his wanting to work as hard as he could to come back. Good little special teams player. It's not going to help you much on the field, even though Seattle has kind of a linebacker issue, off the ball linebacker as far as the talent and depth on this roster. I don't think that this signing pertains to that at all. This is strictly a special teams signing, and he still has kind of an outside looking in opportunity here as far as making the team. We'll just have to wait and see. But I just wanted to mention that. They also signed defensive tackle Roderick Perry, age 25, undrafted, out of South Carolina. Appeared in 2 games last year for the Cleveland Browns. Registered 2 combined tackles. He's just another body at this point, camp body, but we'll see. A guy like that this early in camp has an opportunity to show what he's got. So that's that. Okay, so that's that portion of the show. I just want to get out of this mode because it seems like we're kind of down. We're talking about some bad stuff, but there's a lot of optimism as well coming out of camp. Let's talk about some of the early observations, some of the camp battles we're seeing, some of the opportunities players are making for themselves.
So where to start? There's like so much.
Why don't we start with cornerbacks?
Okay.
With Witherspoon out originally with his contract thing, and then Woolen on the PUP list initially. We're seeing Trey Brown and Michael Jackson run with the ones out there, and then Kobe Bryant in the slot as a starter. So even with our top 2 guys out, we still have some real good quality there and some competition. So I thought that's interesting.
Michael Jackson, Trey Brown, Kobe Bryant, that could have been your starting 3 corners most years for most NFL teams, right? That's the quality that's there. And those aren't starters. The starters are not on the field.
Except for
that demonstrates the depth that Seattle has at cornerback right now.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I know. And
Artie Burns isn't even in that equation.
No. No, it's a great problem to have. And you've got, some of the safeties are playing in the slot nickel, and it's a really talented room. And now that Witherspoon's coming back, Pete Carroll said that he's going to be getting a longer look in the nickel corner spot in direct competition with Kobe Bryant, last year's 4th round pick, starter all season in that position last year. Does that surprise you at all? That what are they trying to do? It seems like they're trying to do one of 2 things. They're either very, very serious that Witherspoon's going to spend the year at this spot, and they're giving him early reps, and he's going to lock down that position, and they're going to allow Mike Jackson to remain outside with Woolen, and that's the deal. Or they're going to change the scheme up a little bit this year to maybe have Witherspoon be the jack of all trades corner in this defense. He's going to play some on the outside. He's going to play some on the inside. And basically, he's just getting reps on the inside now to learn the position, find out what Seattle wants out of that spot, but still be available on the outside as well. It's a good problem to have, Keith.
I mean, it is. People are going to look at, why are you spending the 5th overall pick on a slot corner, right? On a nickel back. And honestly, that is a good question, because you shouldn't be.
Should people be looking at it that way?
I don't think so. I think it's a matter of, you got to get your best 11 defenders on the field. And right now, Mike Jackson's made the case that he's one of them. And so it's like, okay, Mike Jackson can't play in the slot. He's too big, doesn't have the lateral agility to do that job. He's good on the outside, where he's got a boundary to protect him. It's about being, fast, physical. He does the job well, comes up, supports the run, makes tackles better than most corners do. And he's, good in coverage on the outside where he's got a boundary. Woolen's going to be good anywhere, because he doesn't have that lack of lateral agility. He is elite in terms of his physicals and his ability to cut, move,
And
mirror,
recover
all
speed.
those things.
Right.
And so he can play on the inside. Well, okay. So this is what I've been saying like for the last month or so is you start Woolen and Witherspoon. And then when you go to the nickel, Witherspoon slides inside, Mike Jackson comes in and to play on the outside. And you end up moving an elite talent like Witherspoon around because you can.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And I think they're setting this thing up where they've got, Trey Brown can play in that slot as well. He's got that agility to do that, but he also is a great outside guy. They're going to have 5 corners here. Kobe Bryant can play on the outside too. He might be the only, he started he played in college there. He only moved into the slot in the nickel for this team last year. Mm-hmm. And so you've got 5 corners deep that can play any position except for Mike Jackson, you mentioned not being able to slide inside. But you've got a bunch of diversity there. In addition to that, you've got Jarek Reed and Julian Love that can also slide down into the nickel as well, or a dime packages and so forth, where you've got 3 safeties on the field. And I just don't know where all the snaps are going to go. I mean, it's just one of the, or if we're going to end up cutting a guy that is worthy of making almost any other roster in the NFL. I don't know if cutting a guy is in the works here. I think it's a matter of right now it's protection against injury. They'll be deep even if someone gets hurt, right? And that'll be fine. And if nobody gets hurt and they get down to cut down time, they'll have a good young player like a Kobe Bryant or a Trey Brown that they can trade away for a draft pick asset. Interesting. Okay. So how about let's let you talk about the offensive line battles and who's showing up right now and what the team is doing as far as
showing up.
Snaps.
Yeah. So day one, the first team snaps went to Evan Brown at center. That ended after day one. Day two, it was Oluwatimi. And he looked good, looked like he belonged there.
So does that continue to go back and forth, Keith, or are we seeing something now where maybe this is just Oluwatimi's center spot to lose? This early in camp showing up like that, taking that they didn't do it with Anthony Bradford. He's not switching yet with Phil Haynes. This is just Oluwatimi.
Yeah. And it was also one of those things where you look at some of the in the past, right? Charles Cross had that left tackle spot forever, but at the beginning of camp last year, Abe Lucas wasn't in that number one spot. He was, there was a lot of rotation with him and Forsyth and Curran, and it wasn't, until they were a couple weeks in that it became obvious that it was Abe Lucas was going to hold down that job and not give it up. Right. So this isn't just like, oh, this is what they do. For him to be getting those snaps now shows that he is, he's ready to do that. The fact that Bradford's not doesn't necessarily mean that he's not, but it means that he has yet to move himself up equal to Phil Haynes. His team still views him as one rung on the depth chart below Haynes and isn't equal. The fact that Oluwatimi is being given this shows him that he's already equal to Evan Brown by practice number 2.
Or surpassed. And the reason I say that is because, Evan Brown comes in as the guy that's the vet and has starter experience. And, so that may have just been kind of a gesture to him to have him go on day one. But Yeah, I mean, if Oluwatimi comes out here on day 2 or day 3, which is today's practice session, which by the way is a film session, so it is available on Seahawks.com or their YouTube channel. I think begins at 1:30. Just putting that out there. If he comes out here and takes starter reps on day 2, that's a pretty interesting sign to me.
Yeah, if he's getting multiple days in a row of starter reps with Evan Brown working with the second team, and not, this isn't Evan Brown's like banged up and on the sidelines, but he'll be back. Basically what they've said is that Oluwatimi is the starter on this team. It's his job to lose. I think it is his job to lose, but it's also his job to win, right?
Yeah,
the team they expect him to come out and win this job, and as of right now, they see him winning the job. But things can change. But yeah, if he starts getting 2, 3, 4 days in a row, then basically they've made that call. Evan Brown's now a backup.
So early in camp, you got to really love what you're seeing out of the wide receiver group. Not only just from Jackson Smith and Jigba and Tyler Lockett and TK Metcalf, and we'll talk a little bit more about Njigba here in a second, but I wanted to kind of talk about the depth pieces there that we have at wide receiver and what they're doing in camp so far. D. Eskridge versus Derek Young versus Cade Johnson versus Matt Landers. This 4th and 5th and possibly 6th wide receiver spots that are up for grabs right now is going to be epic. I mean, if D. Eskridge can give you something this year from that position, Derek Young can build what he already had, and a guy like Matt Landers can come in and make this roster somehow. This wide receiver room, combined with the 3 guys that we have at the top, is just going to be unreal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you got to like what you're seeing out of the younger guys. We'll see how that progresses. Kind of expected Derek Young to take a step forward. Eskridge has the talent. He's a unique player. For him, it's all about, can he take advantage of that talent and stay on the field? We'll see. He's healthy right now, and that's what matters.
There's two days worth of practices. He's been one of the standouts.
Yeah.
All accounts.
So, but he has, and 2 days worth of practices, he hasn't gotten hurt, which is kind of different than what we've run into in the past. And so if he is over the injuries, he's kind of got his body in a spot where he can come in and do the work and take the beating and not get hurt. I mean, that's a weapon. That's who I mean, there is a reason why the Seattle took him in the 2nd round. Now, we can continue to look at Creed Humphreys and be like, well, they could have picked him, but Oluwatimi's trying to make sure that discussion kind of ends. And D. Eskridge, if he can stay healthy and get on the field, he can make an impact. I think that is, we haven't seen anything from him in 2 years. But that doesn't mean we can't see something from him this year. And that's what's important.
Yeah.
It's the Matt Landers name that you keep throwing in there that is kind of the surprise. Mm-hmm. Because this is a kid that was undrafted. And usually guys go undrafted for a reason, right? If you got that talent, you get drafted. But he's really coming on, looking good. He's a take the top off the defense kind of guy, just elite speed. And exactly. The team loves that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And he's making Drew Lock look good in camp. Now, Drew Lock is the second quarterback on the roster. Everybody knows that. So Drew Lock is getting reps with some of these other 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th wide receiver options on the roster, and they're making connections in camp. Now, obviously, the defense is allowing them to catch the ball if they're in position and can't hit and so forth. But if the ball's able to be knocked away, they certainly do that or intercepted. But Drew Lock's been looking good as well. The 6'4" Landers is a threat in the red zone and over the top. You mentioned that. He's got great speed. He averaged 20 yards per reception in his final collegiate season. And Drew Lock hit him for a a 50-yard plus touchdown reception in camp and a couple other receptions as well. Eskridge has looked good in contested catch situations, I understand, and pulled away from defenders in camp and looked good. Had a 60-yard touchdown pass thrown to him as well by Locke. So I thought I'd throw those two guys out there. K. Johnson looked good. He had a couple touchdowns from Locke as well. And I keep mentioning Drew Locke. I wasn't going to talk about him as far as standing out in camp so far, but guys throwing touchdowns to all these receivers, somebody's going to get credit for that. If Locke's the guy, it's amazing. Now, Smith is also throwing a lot of passes. These guys are just making completions. Again, the defense is just kind of, going through the motions really.
Well, yeah, there's no pads yet.
Right.
So there's no one getting after the quarterback. They're not fearing for a sack or anything. They can sit in the pocket and deliver the football. And that's easy mode for them.
Yes. Yeah.
It is interesting since you brought up Locke. Someone asked Geno Smith about having Drew Locke back, and his response was that it's kind of bittersweet. He likes having him here. He's glad he's here, but that he deserves an opportunity to go win a starting job. That he's good enough that when he gets his opportunity, he's going to kill it.
So it kind of reminds me of himself in a way.
That is where I was going with that. That he sees Locke as a guy who had kind of an opportunity, didn't really make the most of it. Also wasn't really given a great opportunity. Now is going to have to bounce around a little bit as a backup and convince someone that he deserves a chance to, get a second shot. But that when he gets
tremendous amount of parallels there, isn't there?
There really is. They were supposed to battle for the job last year, right? This could have been a contentious relationship, right? They were fighting for the job. Geno won. Locke ended up as the backup. That could really hurt Locke's career, all those kind of whatever. Nah, Geno's glad to have him back. He wanted Locke back in the quarterback room with them, in the film room when they're doing stuff. Shows a lot about his character and a lot about Locke's character. That Locke took the loss of the competition in stride, was like, nope, I'm going to come in, I'm going to continue to work, I'm going to do my stuff, I'm going to help this team, even if I'm helping from the sideline.
He signed his free agent contract fairly early in the process too.
He did
come back and re-sign up and get into a program he knows has helped Geno Smith potentially help him.
Yep. And it really kind of, you go and you look at where he's at, and he needs to come out this preseason and really show that he's taken a step forward. That'll help him quite a bit. And he's going to be ready. And at some point he will have to move on from Seattle in order to get into a situation where he has a shot to win a job. It might be a team with a young quarterback that's struggling, right? Where he goes in, I'm going to be the backup to, Mac Jones in New England, knowing that Mac Jones is going to fall on his face and he's going to get a chance. And that's what he's going to have to do if he wants a chance to get on the field.
Interesting. All right. So let's go onto the other side of the ball. Let's talk about a couple other players. I wanted to mention Jarron Reed. And the reason I wanted to mention that right up front is because we've been talking about Jarron Reed and what they might do at nose tackle for this team. And we talked about Cameron Young being the draft pick, then really nothing else behind them. Well, it came out, kind of affirmed what we've been talking about for weeks as far as Jarron Reed's role on this defense, moving inside to nose tackle. Coach Carroll said about Reed, playing nose tackle for us is crucial when asked about the interior defensive line. So that's where he's been lining up. In the first 2 days of practice is at nose tackle, rotating with Cameron Young. And that seems to be the plan, Keith.
Yeah, I mean, that is what you and I have been saying, right? That Yeah, Cameron Young is a 2-down nose tackle, right? He's not going to offer you much as a pass rusher, but he can get in and just muddy up the works in the middle and keep linebackers clean. That's the type of player he is. That's the type of body he's got. Reed was a nose tackle in Seattle for his first 2 years in the league before moving over to the 3-tech. The team listed him as a defensive end because in a 3-4, that 3-tech is a end position, not a tackle. But they're going to move him back and forth. He's going to get opportunities as an end. He's going to get opportunities at nose tackle.
And he could be one of those players that ends up playing 75-80% of the snaps.
No,
because he can do a lot of things.
No defensive lineman under Pete Carroll has done that. The most
if they play him at 3, if they could play him at 5, if they play him at at nose tackle, he may end up being a guy that they just move around and he never comes off the field.
Michael Bennett, who did all that kind of moving around and multiple positions, whatever, maxed out at about 68%.
Fair.
And did max out at 68% at a Pro Bowl level at all the positions. The team rotates their defensive linemen. They want guys that are fresh. It's a lot of work. It's really hard in there, pushing and getting pushed by those 320-pound offensive linemen. They rotate them to keep them fresh, get their legs fresh. So I don't think you're going to see him, but what you're going to see him is you're going to see him at lots of different spots. They're going to open up, rotation spots at the end position where they have more depth. By moving him inside for some downs where they don't have depth. And so his ability to move around and play both those spots is important for this team.
So I'm going to mention 3 players really quick, and then I want to get to one player that I want to talk about a little bit. Derek Hall is apparently looking really good, winning early in camp against one-on-ones. Doesn't mean a lot right now, but it's just something to note. Julian Love and Bobby Wagner, 2 veterans on this defense. Julian Love coming in as a free agent, Bobby Wagner coming in as a free agent. Sounds kind of weird to say that, but that's what it was. Both players kind of leading by example, kind of veteran present guys, but also on the field, they're showing the guys that, hustle sideline to sideline. In fact, Bobby Wagner chased down Derek Young, the 225-pound 4-4 guy, running a jet sweep in practice and didn't allow him to get around the corner. So, and Pete Carroll made note of that as well. Okay. I want to talk about Jackson Smith and Jigba, Keith, because everyone's talking about Jackson Smith and Jigba. Apparently this guy is just flashing all sorts of skills out there in the first 2 days of practice, both agility and quickness and speed, and his ability to catch the ball, obviously, as shown by a couple of really nice catches. One catch, I think everyone's seen it by now, one-handed grab that basically beat Mike Jackson. That was just one of those highlight plays early on out of camp. So talk to me about the player and why everyone's so excited, what it means for the offense, really.
Well, I mean, he was the first receiver taken in the draft. Which means the team viewed him as the best receiver in the draft. A lot of draft analysts viewed him as the best receiver in the draft. Usually that means you're a guy that's going to come in. Think Garrett Wilson, Smith and Jigma's former teammate last year with the Jets, and his ability to go win Rookie of the Year. Like, that's kind of what you expect when you take someone that high. But he's coming into Seattle where they've got 2 starters that are elite, right? So it's like, well, where does he fit? Well, where he fits is this team's going to run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, and you're going to see all 3 of those guys all the time. And to have a guy with that level of talent as your third is a big deal. I mean, it really is, because it puts so much more pressure on the opposing team to figure out how to cover these guys. Because, yeah, every team's got a third wide receiver. But how many have a third wide receiver that's that good?
Mm-hmm.
he's going to eat up the inside of that the field playing in the slot. Think Doug Baldwin with a little bit more speed.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, and Baldwin was an incredible player for Seattle as that slot guy.
I'll be honest. Njigba comes in to his first practices as a rookie with a way more higher skill set and refinement to his game than Doug Baldwin did coming in.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that is why. Okay, here's another thing. You look at Vegas doesn't have a track record for being wrong, right? Vegas is Vegas for being right, and JSN is the favorite to win Offensive Rookie of the Year.
Is that based on just that one play that just came out in training camp?
No,
or has that been up there for a while?
It came out about when the team when training camp started opening is when that prop bet got put up there.
Interesting.
And
I will say, go ahead.
I would say, yeah. So when you end up with that, what you have is the team was the Vegas is looking at, they believe Seattle's offense is going to be prolific, which means there's going to be a lot of opportunities. And he is a really skilled, talented player.
The beneficiary.
Yep. In a prolific offense. It's going to be a situation where he's going to get those opportunities. That's what they're looking at.
He can very well lead the league in third down conversions. I mean, third down receptions.
I would love that.
Yeah, me too. And screens, like the screen game, and you add Charbonnet to that equation, and Eskridge and Derek Young, guys that can all run that. So I will say this: the buzz that you're hearing about this player, Jackson Smith and Jigba, reminds me of the buzz that we were hearing out of camp about DK Metcalf when he came onto this roster, and we were out there tamping the brakes as much as we could about expectations being set. And it seems like this could happen with Njigba as far as going a couple, 2-3 weeks into camp and first preseason games, and having our expectations just continue to rise to the point where the only thing available to this guy is, stardom. And so it's kind of getting to that point. And it's only been a couple days.
And it's going to continue to raise. And I'm always going to go in with a rookie wide receiver with lower expectations, and that's nothing against Smith and Jigba. I said the same thing about DK Metcalf, and I'm like, just slow it down, bring it down a little bit, because very few rookie wide receivers really live up to statistically that height. And it's just, the NFL is just a different beast, and it takes a year for them to develop into that guy. No matter how good they are. And yeah, it's been less true the last 2 or 3 years than in the past, including DK Metcalf, who exceeded those expectations. But I can't help it. Statistically, I'm going to pump the brakes and be like, let's lower him down a little bit. Because I think one of the things that you can do is you can get your expectations so high on a guy like this that their only option is to disappoint.
Yeah. And they don't live up to their first round status. That's only because of fans, really. Yeah.
Even if they do live up to the first round status, the expectations were so high that they disappointed, even though they had a great year. Yeah. Right? So I'm like, pump the brakes a little bit, get the expectations down. Not, he's going to be not going to play, or not going to have whatever. He's going to have a massive impact on this offense. But let's get him the 100 receptions, 1,300 yards. Let's get rid of that, and say, how about we predict him at 70 and 850 yards? If he does that, that this team's in
It's wildly
great
successful.
shape. It's wildly successful. And if he exceeds that, awesome. Like, sweet, right? But I don't want, if the expectations are 100 and 1,300, and he doesn't live up to that, I don't want people saying he disappointed. I think that's
I have not heard those levels yet, but I could see that happening if this continues to go. But I agree, and we've talked about this before. In fact, we had talked about some expectations and players and so forth. Off-season edition show, I think, is where we said this, that Jackson Smith and Jigba would have a great season if he had 750 yards, 65 receptions, and 7 or 8 touchdowns. That would be an outstanding season, borderline Pro Bowl for a slot guy, a Rookie of the Year candidate, at least Offensive Player of the Year for the Seahawks, no doubt, with huge opportunities into the future. That, I think, needs to be put in perspective, that would be an outstanding season and something to really build on. But if he comes out and just blows it out of the water, it's all out the window. And we can talk about that as time goes on. Obviously, I think we will. He's going to be in our subject of our shows, I think, for the rest of the season, for sure, and well into the future. Okay, that's all I had on my plate to cover in this show. We're running well long. Do you have anything else before we wrap up?
Looking through notes here, I think we hit everything. Yeah. The only other thing which we mentioned was Oluwatimi getting those starts. We talked about that, but the Bradford wasn't. That we hit day 2 and Bradford is not yet.
It doesn't necessarily mean anything.
No, it doesn't. But it is worth watching. And that's one of those things that I'm going to be watching is how long does it take before he gets his shot with the ones? And does he get that shot with the ones on his own merit or because Haynes is banged up and sitting out of practice? Right? And so I'm keeping an eye on that. I want Bradford to win that job because I think that it's better for the Seahawks long term that the rookie draft pick wins the job and not the guy on a 1-year deal. But at the same time, if Haynes wins the job, it's not the end of the world for Bradford. It just means that they're going to bring him along slowly.
Yeah.
It happens.
Absolutely. All right, let's get out of here. Everyone, find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. You know where the show's at. When you find it on your favorite podcast platform, make sure you hit the subscribe button, share it, leave a great review if you can. And then we've got our own YouTube channel as well. Same thing there. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.